Uber, muchas gracias y bienvenidos. Por favor, escojan su idioma utilizando el globo que se encuentra abajo de la pantalla para escoger su
Por favor,
idioma.
para escoger el idioma, si quieren el castellano o el inglés, utilicen por favor el globo, el pictograma del globo que está abajo de la pantalla de la pantalla de Zoom. Y bueno, bienvenida y gracias a todos por participar en este webinario sobre el tema de Endgame. Ya varios países han adoptado metas ambiciosas y pretenden reducir la prevalencia del tabaquismo por debajo del 5%. Artículos en los medios de comunicación esta semana pasada y hace 2 semanas ya mencionaron que la Comisión Europea, en el contexto de lucha contra el cáncer, aspira a una Europa libre de tabaco de aquí al 2040, es decir, una prevalencia por debajo del 5%. Y solamente la semana pasada el presidente Macron en Francia ha comunicado que quiere que la generación que tendrá 20 años en 2030 sea la primera generación libre de tabaco en Francia. Pero ¿cómo alcanzamos las metas de reducción de prevalencia por debajo del 5%? ¿Cómo protegemos al mayor número de ciudadanos contra la pandemia que causa la industria tabacalera? Desde luego que tenemos que acelerar la implementación.
So we have to accelerate the implementation of the control of tobacco use, the taxes and the prices of tobacco, the packaging, and publicity and sponsorship, etc. And we also have to do more. And considering Article 2.1 of control of tobacco that stipulates that to protect public health, human health, we talk about the measures that go more than what is stipulated in the convention, and none of these instruments will demand this and be more strict. The convention framework establishes and it reaches what we're trying to achieve. So what measurements does the Spanish government take to control tobacco use to be below 5% here?
Ejemplos, gracias a líderes
Luckily, for example, in these public health is taking risks. Today, we have a list of speakers who will talk about the academic standpoint, but also scientific in the questions of Endgame. And also they have participated in successful campaigns and new videos to reduce the use of tobacco use. I hope that these presentations are interest you and how we can protect our health and the interests related and organizations that are opposing the control of tobacco use. We have some, you have the option to choose your languages, which are in the globe at the bottom of.
Una presentación internacional. Así que si quieren pueden hacer preguntas, las pueden escribir en el cuadro que está abajo de la pantalla también que dice Q&A, y la pueden dirigir a un orador específico o las pueden escribir en inglés o en castellano. Quisiera dar la bienvenida al primer orador, la doctora que va a ser que nos va a dar unas palabras de bienvenida, es la doctora Adriana Blanco, jefa de la Secretariat.
Dr. Adriana Blanco, Chief of the Tobacco Control of the WHO. Adriana, please. Thank you, Laurent, for the welcome. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this synopsis, this important thing to find control of tobacco use and reach the end game. We have some limited time recently. Like they said recently, a few days ago, we heard Mr. Trump, President of France, the people that 20 and 2030 be a smoke-free generation when the framework convention, it's a CMCT in Spanish, it was negotiated and adopted. There were many countries where plans and regulations to control tobacco, minimal or non-existent. And at that moment, just to think at a final goal at Endgame, didn't seem conceivable, but Article 2.1, like Laurent mentioned, recognized that some parts could reach a point where you could continue to advance in the control of tobacco. You need to go more than the basic measures provided by CMCT. And also to implement Those are the articles of the convention have to be taken account. The end game would be to control tobacco is to reach a rate of less than 5%. But from my point of view, it could be, yeah, 5%, 4% in bigger countries where there are more populations. Today, we will see strategies that will be presented yes, to talk about please let me signal some. First, the strategies need to be approached by sciences. In second place, the strategies should be adequate and reachable to take into consideration which would be the adequate measures to take in a specific culture, in a specific country. This should not be just one strategy, but a menu of options that different countries could adopt. And third, it's important to ensure that a final strategy for the control of tobacco don't be a trap for the minority or the lower income populations. We need to focus our efforts in the more vulnerable situations with the resources so that they could abandon the tobacco use. That way nobody is left behind. The FCTC affirms the right that everybody to have the highest level of healthcare. One of the things it has to do with the necessity of the sectors, and not only the health sector, but the participation of the society, where civil society has the force to stop this. And it's important not to fall into the traps of the tobacco industry. The industry will be more aggressive than ever before, trying to stop these initiatives. Talking about the importance of the tobacco use for the country, we know that it's simply false. And the final message in general for everyone and for our colleagues, allow me to think about the measures more appropriate for their countries. Implement the FCTC as much as possible and go do more. And don't forget the people that are in vulnerable positions. Talk about the ratifying the protocol for tobacco use and resist the interference of the tobacco industry and how they defend their interests. Thank you. Thank you very much, Adriana, for your important comments. I would like to invite
María Luisa Carcedo, la ex
Maria Luisa, ex-Minister of Sanitary and the actual
María Luisa, por
Health
favor.
Ministry. Maria Luisa, go ahead.
El micrófono está apagado. Tiene que apretar el.
Your phone is on mute. Okay, the initiative that tried to stimulate the states to enable to get the new generations without tobacco use in 2040. Before I talk about anything related to Spain, I would like to make a suggestion. All the countries are affected and called to comply with the objectives for 2030. If it would be in our interest, although it just formally align these requirements to within the health care, and objective 11 would be countries that would be inclusive, healthful and sustainable. I would like to complete the vision, and it would fit in with the global context for every country. It's an ambitious objective in reducing the prevalence, the incidence of tobacco use, which is so socially accepted and which is generating so many diseases that could be avoided. In Spain, as I know, we have been working in the reduction of tobacco use for many years. In 2005 was the first law of the regulating tobacco, and it was implemented in 2010, and it came to with the autonomous countries with the control of tobacco use for 2019, 2020. And now we are working on a plan, complete plan, an integral plan aligned with the uh, objectives with the World Health Organization and also with the European Union. The lump of the measures, let me see, I think I have a minute. Yes, I don't want to go over it. Well, quickly. The objectives that are being implemented in Endgame by Spain, the majority are contemplated for the modification of the current laws, but or through real credits. And in general, the lump of the measurements are set to include an integral plan. And for the reduction, there are some cases where there are some measurements, and not to take more time. In the case of the objective 3, in case of objective 9, 10, or 12, that there are difficult in some cases. The bigger difficulties are in the cases of the regulation of the housing and closed institutions like prisons, because it's understand that that's entering into somebody's private areas, and taking these measures that contemplate the declarations with bigger difficulties, and also the case, the measurement number 20, where there's difficulties in smokers. But for the rest, and 12 already cited, it talk about the liberation, which is lower. It would make recommendations on that, but it's definite that the rest of the measurements are implemented or it's foreseen to incorporate through modifications or expansions in the current laws in 2005 and 2010, or through royal credits, but the rest of the measures are shared, and Spain is aligned with these objectives of the WHO, of the WHO, for the plans for 2030, and to achieve a society free of tobacco use. So we aspire that reduction does happen in Spain, and we are at 24% of the population that smokes, despite all the measurements, and it's a problem. We have difficulties in being precise and with the contents of the current laws, especially with, because of the climates that we have, which is just an excuse. But sometimes you don't fulfill the requirements from the ministry. We've had recommendations with drawings even, so that the autonomous communities can implement these. But the political objective, which is what we're talking here, is being shared. And all the measurements, the most importance of expand these no spaces like beaches. There are many areas that are autonomous that have experimented this these past summers. All these measurements are in effect with the regular policies that correspond to it. And thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you for the words.
Ya retos, veo que hay un apoyo
So there
político.
are some challenges and there are political support, and we appreciate that. I would like to, Mr. Francisco Rodríguez Lozano, the president of the European Network, the Prevention for Smoking. He's a previous president of the National Committee of Tobacco Use in Spain. Francisco. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to appreciate the invitation and also appreciate the technical help that we have here, and all the collaborators and all the presenters. I think it will be important that, and talk a little bit more about the end game, which is reasonable, and I think it's reachable. Okay, so in the last few years, we have been at the vanguard in Japan. They just, like she was saying, 2005, 2010, where there was a time that not much has been done, and we have been stuck in the prevalence that we haven't followed through with. I think that currently the Spanish society is an ideal time to make these type of implementations because of COVID. There's important sensibility that has to talk about health. To me, has three fundamental pillars, columns important. One is society. It has to have a social support, like Adriana was saying, and favorable. And we have to explain these to the society and get their support. And after, Adriana also said that the scientific and health departments have to support this in Spain. The FCTC and all the agencies and all the health departments are in favor of a plan to end tobacco use. And then we have the third part, that's the government. And I think that this manner in Spain has been making the modifications. María Luisa has been saying that we try to modify it and take the measurement that we will talk about that are more reasonable and more effective to stop tobacco use. The Spanish society is in favor, definitely. And I think nobody doubts that the Spaniards don't want their children to smoke. And when we're talking about that, the children of the Spaniards not smoke, we're trying to get a smoke-free generation. Even the smokers are convinced of this. So I think that society and that the politicians do what the society demands, and we are on a good path. And health department supports us. Last week there was a plan, a control plan of cancer that was implemented at the planning and end game for Europe. And like Laurent just said, the first minister in French is planning on an end game as well. So everyone, thank you very much, and go ahead. I would like to invite our first speaker who would like to, who's going to do a formal presentation because of the end game, who is Ruth Malone. She was an investigator at the University of California in San Francisco. She's Ruth, por favor, adelante.
Buenas tardes. Thank you. I was going to share my screen and it says it will stop other screen sharing, but I think I do want to continue. Yes?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Can you see that now?
I think so. Yeah, we see your, yep.
You can see my screen. Okay. Well, I'm just very excited to be here with you and have the opportunity to talk about Endgame. I'm going to give a short talk about a decade of Endgame conversations which have been going on. In 2010, I wrote an editorial for Tobacco Control, the journal that I edit, titled Imagining Things Otherwise, New Endgame Ideas. It focused on several papers in that issue that were talking about more structural solutions to the tobacco problem. So rather than simply helping people quit and trying to keep people from starting, we would be focusing on bigger picture solutions. And for some reason, I don't know that I was the first person to use that term, but for some reason, it became a conversation. We had a whole issue of the journal organized by Ken Warner, which more articles about the endgame, more discussion took place. And all over the world, there have been meetings taking up this idea of a tobacco endgame and what that means. And I've been fortunate to speak about this in many countries. It's been very exciting to hear those conversations. Now, what is an endgame policy? This is a definition that we developed in a report we did for Cancer Research UK. Initiatives designed to change permanently the structural, political, and social dynamics that sustain the tobacco epidemic in order to end it within a specific time. And I think one of the things I really want to call your attention to is that this is about permanent change at the big picture level. So we do need to keep going with all our tobacco control measures like smoke-free places and helping people quit. But we also need to think, what is keeping the epidemic going? So structural dynamics may be things like unequal distribution of the burdens of tobacco. For example, if there are greater numbers of tobacco retailers in certain neighborhoods. Political dynamics keep the epidemic going, and we all know what that is. It's industry lobbying influence, particularly at national levels. Industry front groups that are trying to make trouble for us as we try to seek stronger policies. And then social dynamics, and I think this is perhaps our biggest challenge. The social dynamics include continuing widespread acceptance of these products as normal consumer products that are widely sold everywhere, despite their deadliness when used as intended. No other product on the market kills as many people. So how do we create lasting change? There are a lot of policy approaches to endgame, and they fall in three big categories. Regulating the product, in which we look at flavors, packaging, warnings. Regulating the users, and smoke-free policies are the biggest example there. And the one that I'm most interested in continuing to pursue, and we are looking at this here in California, is further regulating the retail market and further reducing the easy availability and normalcy of these products being for sale everywhere. So these are some examples of endgame policy options. The ones with stars have been implemented in at least one California jurisdiction. The one that I see in Spain that looks like low-hanging fruit is to get rid of your vending machines, which would be eliminating a lot of retail access and making that a less normal thing. But there are other things to think about, like could we incentivize retailers to stop selling tobacco products? Can we provide distance between the retailers? There is a good scientific literature suggesting that people who are trying to quit find it easier if they do not have easy access to a retailer. It makes sense. People who use heroin don't want to hang out in the neighborhood where they bought their heroin all the time. So it's just making it less easily accessed for people who are trying to quit. And of course, in California, we've also ended sales of many flavored tobacco products. Another idea that you'll hear more about later is the tobacco-free generation idea, which is a very exciting idea that has not yet been implemented anywhere in the world, but it's a more gradual phase out. And reducing the affordability of tobacco products through establishing minimum prices and prohibiting discounts. Now, this is a beginning of a conversation. The conversation needs to take place over time, and I've found the more people talk about it, the more it begins to take on reality. I think part of our problem is that we have not been very good at continuing to ask this driving question. How is it that the single most deadly consumer product in history continues to be sold so many places? This isn't a normal thing. And we need to be problematizing that for people and saying no other product is like this. We made a case for phasing out sales of cigarettes in this paper published in Tobacco Control. And thanks to Ash, we have both Spanish and French translations of this paper available, which maybe we can mention or send the links for later if you're interested. But here we take up some of the many arguments about why we can't have this conversation about phasing out the sale of these products. Beverly Hills, and we'll be hearing from the mayor of Beverly Hills shortly, is the first US city to take this step, ending sales of actually all tobacco products with a few exceptions. And it was a very exciting, path-breaking moment when this ordinance passed. Possible things we need to think about in terms of messaging at Endgame. We made it, we can unmake it. This is an industrially produced epidemic caused by the most lethal consumer product in history. We have lost too many loved ones. We're losing our wise elders before their time. Tobacco companies now are targeting new generations. Other messaging elements, comparing with other dangerous products that we have done something about. Why do other products have to meet safety standards, but not these? The cigarette century is over. This isn't a normal business anymore. And as tobacco use continues to fall, we need to understand that it's time to prepare for the transition. How do we do that? How do we prepare retailers for this transition? Because it's gradually going to happen. It's a matter of us having the political will and the courage to actually say that we can bring this industrially produced epidemic to an end. So everything we've ever done in tobacco control, as we all know, somebody said, you can't possibly do that. You can't even have non-smoking sections in restaurants. We can't ban smoking on airplanes. We can't have smoke-free workplaces. We can't have smoke-free bars. None of these things could happen, but they all did happen. And they happened because people kept talking about it, kept pushing, kept demanding that something be done about this industrially produced epidemic. So I want to just end by showing you this recent cover of Tobacco Control, in which we featured a copy of the first article linking cigarettes with lung cancer, published in the British Medical Journal more than 70 years ago. Now, it's just scandalous that 70 years after these products are known to cause such terrible diseases, they are still sold on all these street corners. So I hope that will inspire you to believe that we really can make an end game happen. And in California, we are explicitly moving from a tobacco control paradigm to a tobacco end game paradigm. Very exciting to see Spain taking this up. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Ruth. Y un punto muy importante.
Thank you very much, Ruth. And this is a very important point, the fact that the objectives that were impossible at certain times are now our reality in a great number of countries. I remember, well, the convention in 2002, 2003, where thought it was that the subject was too advanced. I remember there were a few organizations that pushed and pushed, and years later, it was the most popular theme when it has to do with tobacco control. So our next speaker is Mr. John Mirisch. He's ex-mayor of Beverly Hills. He is now council in Beverly Hills in California, who is one of the few cities have decided to eliminate all tobacco products. So we have a clear example of a political leader that has taken the action and continue to implement endgame policy in his city. John Mirisch, let's go ahead. Hello, good afternoon from Beverly Hills, California. So John Mirisch, a professor in high school in Beverly Hills, and Mr. Dominguez and Mr. Weimers me llamaban Juan en clase. And my professor, la señora Reyes Miller, me decía Juanito, but for many years I haven't had the opportunity to speak Spanish. I was the mayor of Beverly Hills, and I continue to serve as a councilman in my city. Also, I am a citizen of the European Union, and I still have links to Stockholm. But whatever language, tobacco is harmful to society. Like Ruth Malone says,
productos de consumo, había un producto más mortal que los
that's
cigarrillos.
more deadly than cigarettes. Where someone would say, well, maybe they shouldn't be sold in certain areas. There were some cities had to be that first that would have to stop the sale of tobacco products. 2 years ago, I said, let it be Beverly Hills. I'm going to share in English, unfortunately, about the story about the tobacco control in Beverly Hills and what we have done in our city to decommercialize tobacco.
So it starts for us in 1987, 33 years ago. Smoking was prohibited at that time at public meetings, restaurants, and grocery stores. 12 years after that, in 1999, we prohibited smoking in city parks. This again goes back to what Ruth Malone had said. You can't do that. You can't ban smoking in city parks.
No puede prohibirse esto. La gente lo puede hacer y lo hicimos y eso se hizo hace
13 years ago, in 2007, smoking was prohibited in public and private open-air dining areas. So same thing, people were saying it's outdoors, it doesn't bother anyone. Well, it did. 2014, 6 years ago, and I was a part of that. I've actually been a part of all of this. I've been on the council since 2009. So with everything from what I'm talking about now going forward, I was part of the decision-making process. In 2014, we made the decision to treat e-cigarettes the same as tobacco. In that same year, we also prohibited smoking in outdoor service lines, in farmers markets. Farmers markets, it's logical. It's supposed to be a place where you get healthy and organic food. It makes no sense to have people smoking there. But also in outdoor public and private plazas. That was a loophole that had existed from before, so we closed the loophole. In 2017, we prohibited smoking within 20 feet of open-air dining areas, unless while actively walking. Again, narrowing the loopholes and making it even more difficult to smoke. That same year, we prohibited smoking within the public right-of-way, as mentioned, but also in all multi-unit housing. So this applies to all apartment buildings, all condos, any multifamily housing, because smoke travels. It can travel through the HVAC systems. It can travel under the doors. That was a major activity. That was a major action that we took as well. 2018, we banned the sale of all flavored tobacco products. I understand that flavored tobacco in Spain is not that big of a problem. In America, it certainly is. Menthol, especially for Black communities, has been a problem and has been marketed towards Black communities. And flavored tobacco has also been used with e-cigarettes to try and gain new smokers by marketing it towards children. When we were discussing the ban on flavored tobacco at the council at the time, and it was a very interesting and robust discussion, and Ash and Chris and Laurent came and presented, and Ruth as well. My opinion was, why are we even talking about this? Why not just ban tobacco, the sale of tobacco products, period. So in 2019, we considered it. I get the sense that there was some pushback, obviously, from businesses, but also, as Ruth said, the psychological, you can't do that. So rather than simply taking a snap decision, we let our Health and Safety Commission, we have a number of commissions in our city, including a Health and Safety Commission. They initiated the process, and on the basis of a lot of our recommendations, they then recommended back to the City Council, also from the input of with public input. So we took the decision then when I was mayor, and we have a system that we rotate as mayor. We have 5 council members and we each take turns. It's something that's fairly unique in the US as well. It's not a directly elected mayor, but at the time I was mayor, and we were able to pass the ordinance in 2019, which actually took effect on January 1st of this year. Initially, the business community advocated an exemption for all existing businesses, and we got 203 letters and that sort of thing. Eventually, we ended up with a compromise, but effectively, we are banning the sale and have banned the sale of tobacco products from January 1st of this year. As Ruth mentioned, we were the first city to do so, and Manhattan Beach, which is another city in Southern California in LA County, followed suit, and their tobacco sales ban took effect on January 1st as well. Just to give you a brief rundown of the exemptions that we made, hotels may only sell to guests, so that you can't walk into a hotel and say, I want some cigarettes. Because the thought was that you would otherwise have the concierge who would simply say, all right, we'll run down the street to Los Angeles, buy cigarettes there. So some of these were based on very practical considerations. And also, let's face it, when it comes to public policy, as I've learned by serving on the council for 12 years, there's some cases where you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This isn't just good. This is something that I think, as Ruth said, is pioneering in many ways, because many people in the past have simply said, you can't do it. And we did it, and we hope that other cities will follow. And when the time for Q&A comes, I'm very happy to answer any questions about some of the issues that we may have had, some of the obstacles, and how we went about solving it in our case. So I think that we are the city that, as Ruth suggested, has simply taken a, let's not talk about placing more limitations on the product itself, on the users, though we have done both of that, specifically the users. Obviously, as a city, we can't place limitations on, the tar nicotine content, but we really did take the third point about retail. And I think we're also saying not in our city, that smoking and tobacco do not reflect values that reflect our city. And our values as a city, which we aspire to be a healthy city. We aspire to be a city that is full of community and full of healthy members of our community. So as I had said at the time, somebody has to be the first. Let it be us. I'm very glad and proud that we were, and I would like to help Spanish cities, Swedish cities, European cities, and American cities, and to help them go over that hump and allow them to follow suit. Thank you very much, and I look forward, when the time comes at the end, to taking any questions you may have.
Muchas gracias, John, por este
Thank you
ejemplo.
very much, John, for giving us this practical example that have been helped with the endgame politics in question to the tobacco. The next presenter will be Raquel Fernández Megina, no fumadores.org in Spanish. Raquel, go ahead and tell us what it is about endgame. Thank you, Laurent, and thank you, John. What has happened in Beverly Hills is very inspiring. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Adriana, María, Luisa, thank you for presenting this webinar. And thank you to Ash to make this happen. Our argument today is the result of thousands of voices that want to end tobacco use in Spain, because it's something that COVID pandemic has taught us is that without health, there's no economy, there is no prosperity, and there is no future, because health comes first. The declaration of the tobacco endgame of 2030 arises from a society that is tired and does not want to tolerate tobacco use and is demanding transform its health and social politics and save lives, like it would be like controlling tobacco and nicotine. In order to implement said policies and in the civil society and also helping with the health society, we are making the change and shifting to a political agenda. Everyone here present, we are responsible to push and demand said change, because if we don't do that, we also will be responsible for the loss of lives and the suffering of the sick and their families. The end game of 2030 is to take on the fight against tobacco use in a manner that is brave, clear, and without fear, because it's about a strategy in the long term that serves as the base for actions in the short and medium term. The main objective is to save thousands of lives, prevent diseases that take from the quality of life, and secure that the new generations do not become addicted to tobacco or nicotine. Therefore, the base of Endgame would be the first tobacco-free generation of 2025. It's the key to drastically reduce the rates below 5% in 2030 and below 2% in 2040. Because it's got to be clear, we have to stop with this end game. The states and the political groups have to act now, because every day that passes without legislation coming down on tobacco, which was lax 10, 15 years ago, but now it is lax. Because they still contribute to the advancement to tobacco use. In short term, all of the measures that are really in Endgame were already reflected in the Declaration of Madrid 2018. They are coherent and have synergy, and they avoid actions without control that lose the sight, which is its major point, which is saving lives. Amongst the measures in short term, midterms in Endgame 2030 is contemplated. Increase smoking is the expansion and the consolidation of open air areas like patios and hotels and entrance to buildings, sports venues, beaches, pools, and other areas. And also taking that same treatment for electric cigarettes. This will allow to release the pressure that exists in the health system, and billions of euros derived from the treatment of lung cancer and other pathologies. To consolidate this in 2030, we also need strategy in the midterm. In the state, in the reconversion, industrial, and the professional sector tobacco, like with the reconversion, the carbon industry. So we need a reconversion, not only for the distribution of tobacco, as well as for the agriculture sector. We have to find new crops that replace those of tobacco. It's also necessary public investment investigation to increase life expectancy with people that have pathologies due to tobacco use. And lastly, with the objective to cut down the use of tobacco to all those that were born in 2007 and beyond, as of the moment that they reach of age, which would be 2025. To do that, it is important to get to that coming of age without the use of tobacco. That's why it's important to eliminate, especially from the vending machines, which was mentioned previously, which Ruth mentioned it. And no smokers with the use of FACWA. We have surveyed more than 5,000 fathers. When was it that they wanted their children to start smoking? Well, even the 38% admitted that they consume traditional tobacco, lit or electronic. 97.5 responded never. It's an overwhelming percentage that must allow us to reach the means so that our children don't fall to the use of tobacco. This is the base of the exit of Endgame. Our youth, the Endgame is for them and by them, so that tobacco is never part of their lives. This is the project that has been from the civil society and the Spanish healthcare. And we want Endgame that wanted the philosophy to inspire the future lay and to end tobacco use and goes to Congress, because if we don't allow the law of tobacco use, we would have lost another decade. And this cannot happen. Social change is unstoppable. We have the support of the WHO, the European Union, but more importantly, we are supported by the majority of the Spanish society, which they have demanded their leaders to have the tobacco industry stop the death without these consequences. And I invite you to read the declarations of Endgame 2030 and to subscribe. It's very important that we all get together so that society ends with the death game, which is caused by the tobacco industry. Thank you for listening and thank you for being here. Thank you, Raquel. You know, I remember that you have support by the Spanish society. I remember, for example, when after it was smoke-free and they asked the health minister, and he even said the mayor of New York said the same thing. You know, it's like we should have done it before. We have a lot of support and we didn't know it. And this is what everyone has wanted. The next speaker will present the strategy of the Endgame in Holland. And it's an innovative to stop the sale of tobacco products. This is Daniëlle Arnold.
Thanks, Laurent.
Adelante.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Daniëlle Arnold, and today I'll give you an overview of our approach to achieve a tobacco-free future in the Netherlands. So basically our endgame strategy. Next slide, please. Before I delve into my topic more deeply, I'll start off with a couple of facts. So in 2019, 21.7% of Dutch adults smoked and 7.7% of youth smoked. Each year, 20,000 Dutch people die from smoking, and every week, hundreds of Dutch children start with daily smoking. And 2/3 of the current Dutch smokers start before they turn 18. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So what kind of situation did we come from in the Netherlands? So between 2010 and 2012, Mrs. Edith Schippers from the Liberal Party was our Minister of Health. Some people gave her the nickname Minister of Tobacco because during her time in office, tobacco control initiatives were all weakened or cancelled. For example, the smoking ban in small bars was reversed and funding for anti-smoking campaigns was cut. Next slide, please. As regards society, we had a society that was very polarized. On the one hand, there were tobacco control supporters like us. It's the next slide. Yes, so tobacco control supporters like us who were seen as fun corrupters and health freaks. And on the other hand, there were tobacco control opponents like our former Minister of Health, who were all about freedom of choice. Next slide. So when did we start turning the tide and how did we do that? In 2013, the Dutch Alliance for a Smoke-Free Society was founded by the Dutch Heart Foundation, the Lung Foundation, and the Dutch Cancer Society. Within a year, about 40 partners had joined our network. Taking the FCTC as a starting point, our first question to answer was, what is the fastest road towards a smoke-free Netherlands? So first, we united our forces, and then we started working on a joint strategy. Next slide. Our first step then was to determine our main goals. we decided we wanted more and structural political and societal support for Smokefree Netherlands. We also wanted a focus towards feasible and effective measures based on the FCTC to realize a Smokefree Netherlands as quickly as possible. And we wanted to make friends among crucial stakeholders, such as, for instance, medical associations, because support from these stakeholders is very important to achieve the first two goals. The next step then was to come up with a strategy to achieve our goals. We then came up with the smoke-free generation frame, also discussed as the tobacco-free generation. From then on, our strategy was to focus on protecting youth against tobacco. This means we strive in the Netherlands for a society in which parents of children born from 2017 onwards can raise their children free from smoking and from exposure to smoking and passive smoking. Next slide, please. So some characteristics of our smoke-free generation frame. First of all, protecting youth is key because hardly anyone is against this. We use a stepwise approach where we follow the life path of children born in 2017, and I'll come back to this in a bit. The frame is consistent with all political colors because, like I said, hardly anyone is against a smoke-free generation. The frame, also important, does not prohibit smoking, but calls on smokers not to smoke in front of children, and it offers them help to stop. We also use a positive tone of voice in all our communication. Next slide, thank you. A couple more characteristics. The frame works as a positive umbrella for all kinds of tobacco control initiatives and also creates a relationship between them. And lastly, everybody can contribute. For instance, sports clubs can help achieve the goal of a smoke-free generation by voluntarily becoming smoke-free. I just talked about the stepwise approach, and here you can see the stepwise approach we designed to let children grow up smoke-free. Our focus changes as the children born in 2017 grow older. We started with a focus on smoke-free pregnancies, and then the focus shifted towards smoke-free children's environments. This roadmap needs an update now because we've already realized many of the steps that you see here. So, what have been the successes of our approach? First of all, joining forces in the same direction has led to more power and better results. Support for tobacco control increased significantly since the start of our alliance and since the focus on a smoke-free generation. We monitor this support every year. And to give you an example, support for smoke-free playgrounds, for instance, increased from 65% in 2015 to 91% in 2020. Also, our movement has rapidly expanded, and the movement becomes more and more visible because of many bottom-up initiatives. Next slide, please. We've also had political success. In preparation for our parliamentary elections in 2017, we lobbied with political parties. After the elections, the new government's plans included first the aim of achieving a smoke-free generation, and second, the intention to develop a national action plan for tobacco control. The next step was the development of the national action plan. This so-called National Prevention Agreement was negotiated by societal parties and the government. It covers tobacco, alcohol, and obesity. And as you can see on the slide, the package of actions and measures on tobacco includes societal actions, but also government measures, such as tax increases and a reduction of the number of tobacco points of sale. And many of these actions and measures have by now also been completed or implemented. Next slide, please. I'd like to end with highlighting one important element of our national prevention agreements, and that is the reduction of the number of tobacco points of sale that I already showed on the previous slide. Building on the prevention agreement, we've worked towards a solid policy plan on this topic. As with all measures, we started with increasing awareness and support among the Dutch population using the smoke-free generation framework and campaigns. And with result, as you can see on the slide, because the support for the measure increased from 62% in 2016 to 71% in 2020. And next to this, we tried to influence government action. For that, it also helped that we could show the big support for the measure among the Dutch population. And then next slide, please. My final slide also. After some societal successes, in November of last year, our government presented a policy plan. It includes a ban on the online sale of tobacco and related products in 2023, and a ban on the sale in supermarkets as of 2024. And eventually the sale will be limited to tobacco shops only. So to summarize my presentation, we definitely still have quite a road ahead of us before we really achieve a tobacco-free Netherlands. But the creation of a strong tobacco control alliance with many parties working together on realizing a smoke-free generation has been a key factor in taking important steps in the Netherlands in recent years. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Gracias, Daniëlle. Es realmente sumamente importante.
Thank you, Daniëlle. It's very important. The importance to focus to reduce tobacco products, like Ruth said. And that wasn't included in the framework, in the convention markup for the minority and majority. It's important that we have the Holland's example. The next speaker, Professor Dick Daynard, Richard Daynard, the Northeastern University in Boston. He's an attorney in the College of Law and has dedicated to control tobacco for many years. He will talk about the concept of a Generación Libre de Tobacco, which is a new context, and this is part of the strategy implemented in Spain. Dick Daynard, please go ahead.
Thank you. Delighted to be here. The smoke-free generation policy that I'm going to be talking about is a very specific policy. It's Daniëlle explained the Dutch notion of smoke-free generation as a whole series of policies, all wonderful policies. But this is a very specific policy, and it's a specific policy designed to completely phase out the sale of tobacco products. To understand, you have to understand it, you have to understand the concept. It's not an age restriction policy. It's a policy that involves a cohort of people, and a cohort means everybody who was born in the same year. So to take Raquel's suggestion, the apparently the preferred policy of no fumadores, of a smoke-free generation that would take effect in 2025. For that to work, you would need to say that anybody born on or after the year 2007 could never be sold a tobacco product. These are people who right now are, I guess, 14 years old, average of 14 years old. And the idea is they could never be sold a tobacco product, and anybody who's younger than them, anybody born in any subsequent cohort could never be sold a tobacco product. And why 2007? Because the age of sale in the Netherlands, in Spain, is 18. I guess it is throughout Europe. So the point is that if you're born in 2007, you could not legally be sold a tobacco product until 2025. So if instead of saying, hooray, it's 2025, now we can start smoking and killing ourselves, you say, no, no, that's not right. And, you know, at that point, you can never be sold. And that generation and all younger generations, all younger cohorts can never be sold tobacco products. Okay, what will the effect of this be? This will lead inexorably to the eventual end of tobacco use, tobacco sales and tobacco use. But you don't have to wait till you know all living generations are smoke-free generations, because it's likely to produce a much faster phase out of tobacco use, because with increasing numbers of tobacco-free cohorts as the years go by, 2025, 2026, 2035, 2045, tobacco use will quickly lose its social acceptability. Social acceptability is critical for tobacco use. I mean, it's how so many people got to be smokers, that this was thought to be a very cool thing for young people to do, an entryway into adulthood and maturity and so forth. At this point, no, this isn't looking so cool anymore. This is looking like something that really only old people do, not mature people, 21-year-olds, but, older people. The younger, exciting generations just aren't doing it anymore. Okay. Secondly, it's politically acceptable. It has the tremendous advantage over a ban on sales of cigarettes that it's politically acceptable because it does not involve taking anybody who's a smoker, or at least has been ever legally sold tobacco products, and saying, no, you can't smoke anymore. You can't use tobacco anymore. You can't get your nicotine fix. It doesn't do that. It doesn't do that. And similarly, it will not create a black market, because if you're not, the only people who will patronize a black market are people who are nicotine addicts. If they're not nicotine addicts, they're not going to be desperately seeking somebody who will supply them, on the side for some very high price, some tobacco product. They don't want it, they don't need it, and it's not going to happen. Thirdly, we have that wonderful study that Raquel talked about, demonstrating a point I've been making for a long time, which is that when you ask parents, or at least any parent who knows the health effects, the deadly health effects, the addiction and then the deadly health effects of tobacco use, you ask any parent, at what age would you like your kid to start smoking? And we began asking this when the US was moving from age 18 to age 21 in a lot of places. The US is now all age 21. And we would ask, ask the question, at what age would you like your kid to start smoking? Is it 18 or is it 21? And people's answer was, you're crazy. That's a crazy question. I don't want him ever to start smoking. And of course, we now have evidence that Spanish smokers agree. Smokers and not Spanish parents agree. They don't, 97.5%, if I have the number right, never want their kids to start smoking. Never. That's what the proposal does. It's very simple. That's what the proposal does. And then the strongest argument against this proposal, and Ruth and others have made this point, the strongest argument against this has always been, was the strongest argument against bans on smoking on airplanes, in restaurants, in bars, is that it can't possibly happen because nobody's doing it. So there must be smarter people out there who know a good reason why it can't happen, because otherwise it would happen. Well, last week, President Macron killed that argument. It's going to happen in France. And if it can happen in France, it can happen in Spain. It can happen anywhere in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Daynard.
The next speaker is Chris Bostic. He's the director of ASH Politics, and he will present a global movement that is developing specifically the access and sale of tobacco products. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Laurent. And thank you to the rest of the presenters today. It's a real honor to be a part of this. I think we're living through a key transition in the long history of the fight against tobacco. I think we're at a turning point here. I'd just like to wrap the discussion up quickly. I know we're a little behind and I want to leave time for some questions, so I'll move a little quickly through my slides. But I wanted to make sure that everyone realizes that we have Beverly Hills and Manhattan Beach and Spain and France and the Netherlands and California, the state of California are leading the way, but they're not alone. This is being discussed in many, many places. And I think we're going to see a similar reaction to the smoke-free air movement that Laurent mentioned earlier. It's going to seem impossible until there's an avalanche, and then everybody will be jumping on board. So I'm going to talk briefly about Project Sunset. This is a global effort to phase out the sale of commercial combustible tobacco products, and that's at a minimum. Many governments will choose to end the sale of other products as well, but the vast majority of deaths from tobacco are caused by cigarettes, so that's our primary target. We're supported in our efforts by 2 committees of experts in science, law, and advocacy. There's one national committee in the United States and a global committee. Next slide, please. I wanted to quickly go over where ASH comes from on this. We take a human rights-based approach to tobacco control, and the group that has put it best, the link between human rights and tobacco, is the Danish Institute for Human Rights, which did a human rights audit of Philip Morris International in 2017. And this is their conclusion. They say that according to the United Nations Guiding Principles, that's the UNGPs, it requires the cessation of the production and marketing of tobacco. So in other words, according to a major human rights organization, under human rights norms, the tobacco industry has to go out of business immediately or as soon as possible. Next slide, please. I'm pretty much going to skip this one. I wanted to leave it in the deck so that when people see the recording or they download the PowerPoints, they can see it, but I'll just slide right by that. So can I have the next slide? And you can read these as well. These are the various visions that have come across that for Project Sunset related Endgame activities. I won't read them all, but my point here is that they differ on how they treat electronic cigarettes and other non-combustible tobacco products, and that's okay. The last thing we want to do is allow that debate within our community to prolong the tobacco epidemic. So, from a Project Sunset point of view, if a government wants to get rid of cigarettes, they can get rid of whatever they want or nothing else, but cigarettes is the key. Next slide, please. I'm going to just quickly go over this one as well. We have just 3 cardinal rules for Project Sunset. It's about sale, never possession or use. It's the tobacco industry that is doing the wrong that we're trying to correct, not smokers. Access to cessation is imperative. We can't abandon current adult smokers. And of course, particularly in the United States, we need to ensure against inequitable enforcement of any new laws. Next slide, please. And I'm also just going to leave that on the screen. I won't go through it, but this is the strategic plan for the global group. Our main job is to create an atmosphere that encourages the political will to plan for endgame among governments. And I think we're seeing some success. It's people are now talking about it. When ASH got into this about 5 years ago, even amongst our own colleagues, the response was, "Oh, you can't do that." Just like everyone else has said on this webinar, it's impossible. But obviously it is possible, and Beverly does show us that. Next slide. I'm happy to answer questions now, and I'm happy to answer questions offline as well. Please feel free to email me. I'm always happy to talk about Endgame. Thank you. Back to you, Laurent.
Thank you, Chris. We have the opportunity for questions and answers. You can write them down in the Q&A in the box right below the screen. You can write them in English, in Spanish, and I'm going to read what's written down. So I will start with the first three questions. There was two questions that I'm going to direct to John Mirisch. I see it's disappearing. Give me 1 second. The first question is for John Mirisch.
So this one is directed to you, John, and it's on the fact that Beverly Hills is a unique community. It's very wealthy, educated, used to strong regulation. So what would be your advice to the more diverse socioeconomic communities, so diverse communities who want to proceed with this? And also the question that came on the topic about data on perception, attitudes, and compliance with the regulation since its introduction in Beverly Hills. I know you answered them already. You wrote them down, but I think the attendants would probably be interested in hearing your answers.
Okay. It's interesting. Oh, okay, here. Go to answered questions. I can go back and I can look at the actual questions. The first question from Olena Tigova was, is there any data about reception attitudes and compliance with the regulation? And the answer is there isn't now. It's only been in effect for about 6 weeks. We're in a semi-state of lockdown here because of COVID. And so we do know that there is, I think, 1 or 2 businesses, they can apply for a hardship exception to extend the time in which they can sell cigarettes. That's going to come before, one of them is going to come before the council next month, I believe. It's a gas station that sells cigarettes. But more importantly, there was a whole period of over a year in which people knew this was coming and it was publicized within our city. For the most part, we had a lot of support from our residents who felt that this is good. They were proud of the city. They didn't like having outdoor smoking and that sort of thing. And so this was the next, if you will, logical step. The next question from Heather Celine was that Beverly Hills is a rarefied community, well-educated and that sort of thing. I wrote that that's a little bit of a stereotype of Beverly Hills. I mean, we're compared to some other parts of LA, it's affluent, but our median household income is not in the top 10 of LA County. Most people don't know that over 50% of our residents are renters. I believe 35% or more of our residents speak a foreign language at home. So we're a very cosmopolitan community. In many cases, people are coming from countries, the Middle East or other places where people are more used to smoking cigarettes. And so, we had some of the same arguments about, I guess, some libertarian arguments. What I do is my own business and that sort of thing. But for the most part, I would say I think we are more diverse than most people would know. And we did something that we felt was appropriate to our own individual community, knowing what the makeup of that is. And that's what other communities have to do. As I think maybe Ruth Malone mentioned, that we know in California and in the US that Black communities are targeted for menthol cigarettes and have been. And there's advertising campaigns, which we have on national TV, using rappers and other people in the Black community to state how offensive that is and how they're being targeted. And they feel, I guess, that's an effective way of pointing out for them. From my perspective, each community, I'm very much a communitarian, each community needs to decide what works for them. But ultimately, at the end of the day, banning the sale of tobacco products is about the health and the safety of the residents. And whether you are in South Central LA or Beverly Hills or Ladera Heights or View Park or Oviedo or Torremolinos or Mexico City, we're all people, and we're it's not like certain countries are immune from the negative effects or impacts of tobacco. So as said, I would take a localized approach. I do think we've heard many times now that, one of the biggest arguments is where people are just saying, when we're talking about banning the sales, you can't do that. Well, you can, and we did. And so, each community needs to find the best way to get to that point.
Thank you, John.
Gracias, Juan. La siguiente.
The New Zealand example. And some of us have been involved, and Chris, for example, Bostic, I know you've been very involved and engaged with the Sunset Group and the New Zealand tobacco control advocates. So could you comment on that, and how does, given that you've been very involved with the New Zealand Endgame strategy, I'd like you to comment on what you think would be, you know, a lesson learned from New Zealand at this stage.
Laurent, I had trouble with the translation. Were you directing that to me?
Yes, yes, and I was saying it in English for that reason. Yes.
As I wrote in the Q&A box, New Zealand is an exemplar. I don't think there's any country that can say they've done more to implement the FCTC, and their prevalence rate shows that, demonstrates it. And they're one of the Aspire countries. They're one of the countries that has set a date and a prevalence that they want to get to. They're actually the most aggressive one. They want to get to 5% or less by 2020.
Llegar al 5% más al 2025. Pero Richard Edwards,
Project Sunset Steering Committee, got involved in Endgame because as the person in charge of making that happen in New Zealand, he understands that they're not going to make it, that the FCTC is vital, everyone needs to implement it, but in New Zealand at least, it's not going to be enough to get them to 5%. And so they're going to have to start considering Endgame policies. So definitely look to them, but look to the folks on this call too.
Thank you. So indeed, so it sounds like we need to not only accelerate the FCTC, but in line with Article 2.1 of the FCTC, address some new measures. Then there's a question that I'll read in Spanish. España es un país productor de tabaco.
Spain is a country that produces tobacco. Is the Spanish government willing to deny the proceeds from the sale of products, and the people that grow the tobacco, are they willing to stop and grow something else? Francisco Esteve can give an answer to this question.
Bueno, respecto a eso.
Well, regarding that, it's not a question of wanting or not to want. It's a question of that the government enforce it. There have been other conversions to industry in the 80s. We had the industrial reconversion in the carbon sector. And we were convinced that at that moment, the carbon sector did not want to be converted, and it was. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, the Spanish agricultures were receiving money. I'm talking about tobacco agriculture. They were receiving money from the European Union to cultivate tobacco that, you know, it's incomprehensible that the European Union be financing the cultivation of tobacco. So it's not a question of wanting or not. It's a question from the government point that the government want to end with a tobacco pandemic and decide to reconvert the sector. And if the agriculture passes to other crops, and then evidently they don't have those losses. You need to give those agricultures another way of living that does not imply the death of thousands of people. I think when we talk about death, nobody likes it. Let's give them another means of living. And what you're talking about, the tax on tobacco, we are going to increase the tobacco taxes. That way we can get more. We will able to get more. So what we're going to do is save billions of euros and the diseases that produced by tobacco and treating those diseases. And this implies arson, fires, and affects the health department. If we reduce the income, we will also increase the savings. What we can't do with tobacco is be something in short term. We have to think in the long term. Unfortunately, a lot of politics think what will give them votes now and not what in the global well-being. Okay, Esteve, I think your hand is up. Sí, I just want to say thank you. I wanted to report what Raquel was saying. Just remember that Spain has meaning with the European Union about €5, 4.80, and that's the package. It's evidently €12 that Ireland or United Union or another country in north of Europe. It's a fallacy. Income does not reduce, despite that there is a high range of smokers. What we need to do is one of the measures that needs to is to increase the prices of tobacco, along with other politics that have been already stated. Thank you, Esteve. Another question, what is the compromise of the European Union to support the politics of Endgame? Francisco, you know about the subject. Maybe you can answer. Can you hear me well? This is something new because we have seen last week the European Commissionary that has to do with a European plan, and they have announced specific measures and concrete in condition to spaces, the restricted spaces, taxes have been very effective. And it has, Esteve has commented that you'd increase the price so they don't start smoking. You know, they cost about 5 euros or 2.5 when the Canary Islands where I live. So they cost about €5. And it seems that that's where the alignment, the problem that we see in Europe is that, and this is the European Union cannot go into certain areas that have to do the nation level. We talk about the consensus of everyone so that we can do things. So we need to see how this develops, something very recent. So we do have them hope. What can we do? What do Spanish politics, in this case, is for Spain? So it's something normal, something that happens in Europe and neighboring countries are doing. We are talking about a price of €5, but we have some prices in France. The prices are much higher. We're talking about, and we could be like somewhere in the middle, but I insist that Spain, the prices are much lower in the European Union. Of course, we sent a report to the Human Rights Commission because of the prices are so low in the tobacco in Spain compared to France. Yesterday, there was a phone call with French groups with the political support by part of President Macron is very strong. If you allow me, Spain has seen that in 2020, well, tourism has taken a dive because we are a visitors country. The sale of tobacco has dropped because tourists don't come to buy tobacco. That market existed, or the black, like legal black market. I'll go to Spain and I'll come back with 5 or 10 boxes of tobacco. Yes, exactly. You cross for the French to buy tobacco. The next question.
And it was a question on the to some extent it ties to the responsibility of the government versus the governments, the industry, and how does it work if we had a state-owned agency dealing with tobacco? because we hear a lot of the tobacco industry talking about a smoke-free future, but we know this is not, it's more rhetoric than is real action. It's really about, it's really more words and rhetoric, and so the onus will really be on government. So the question that has been posed is about how different would it be if it was a state-owned agency implementing Endgame. And I know the question was posed to you, Ruth, and I know you answered it in the chat, but I'd like you to, for the rest of the audience and those who may not have read the answer, for you to address it live.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was looking at the other questions as you were speaking. So if you could just refresh me as to which question this is.
So it's the one about if you were moving toward a state-owned tobacco agency,
yeah.
Given that the difficulty with, and my view is that really the onus should be on governments, because we cannot trust the agents, the private industry to do it.
Well, I think, yeah, if the government is absolutely committed to an end game goal, then I think in some ways that would be the ideal, because then the government has full control of all the policy instruments around retailing tobacco. It can say we are only going to have 3 stores selling it now in this city, or we are going to have all the tobacco products out of sight, or we are only going to carry 3 brands, or we are going to require things about, we're going to require them to not have nicotine, whatever. Then the government has complete control. But the downside there is that if you have a government that is not committed to an end game goal, then they may not follow through and they will want the tax revenue. So it really is a matter of really strongly continuing to make the case about how government does not come out ahead from people smoking. They may get tax revenue, but they're spending more on healthcare because of this unnecessarily. So, you know, I think there are certainly opportunities there for, and in Spain, I understand that you have all your sales are in government, at least sanctioned outlets. So you have some opportunities there, I think. But I think there are up and downsides. We have a group of economists that we brought together in California to look at the end game, to look at economic issues in an end game transition. And one of the things that people are examining is, how do you transition as you move toward end game, as you do see prevalence dropping and tax revenue is dropping. There will come some point at which you're no longer getting so much tax revenue, and how do you prepare for that transition?
Laurent, if I may add, we have suggested that we're going to offer some of the businesses like the convenience stores help and assistance. You know, our ideal was that instead of selling cigarettes, they could maybe sell kombucha or something like that. However, I would also say at the same time, I'd be a little bit wary of just the economic argument, because as everyone's probably aware, Philip Morris did these crazy studies that showed that governments were actually saving money because people were dying earlier and they were, you know, not having to then take care of them for all of these years. I look at this largely as a health and safety issue, and it's a moral issue, and it should be framed as a moral issue. And, you know, as Ruth correctly has said, this is a product that is aimed to kill people. There's something inherently wrong to facilitate that within our communities. And as said, I think we need to not just look at the economics, but importantly, which is something we tend to forget in our day and age, is look at it from the moral and the impact on the community side.
Thank you, Jen. Ruth, you want to add something to this?
Just one small other point that I didn't have time to make in my talk. I think it's so important for us to convey to people that this is a historically produced epidemic. It was not until the invention of the machine-rolled cigarette that we had an epidemic of lung cancer. This was not, I mean, people did use tobacco before for hundreds of years, but they used it in much less harmful forms. These were not highly engineered products. There was much less use. Lung cancer used to be a very rare disease. And so putting that in a historical perspective, I think helps people understand this is not like the way it's always been. This is a historical anomaly that we should correct.
Vale, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would like to have more time for more questions, but unfortunately, we are short on time. So I will pass the Professor Dr. Esteve Fernandez, who will conclude the meeting. I just want to remind everyone that the articles that Ruth Malone mentioned about Endgame and the British Medical Journal, it's in English and in Spanish, and we have links at the end and you'll be able to see them. And there's also a blog for the tobacco control that's available, but only in English. Esteve, please. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Laurent. It's been a pleasure to be in the webinar. I think it's a very important initiative. NoFumadores.org with ASH, and without the movement, the control of tobacco use in space formed by other scientific societies and the National Committee to Prevent Tobacco Use, and with so many societies, I think it's a very important gesture of what we have in our hands. It's a very important problem. The end game, this final goal, the end game, we have to, something I had to interpret in Spanish, but it's a moment that we have been able to see through this webinar, the experiences, concrete experiences from different, from local to global impact. We have talked about countries. We have had the framework, the framework convention of tobacco control, which does affect global. It affects us. We can't look elsewhere. We haven't. This is crazy. This is a message that has been repeated time after time, and we have to be able to take this. It's a lot of interesting things have been mentioned, and it's impossible to summarize everything. But one very important aspect is the control of tobacco. The social acceptability of the regulation to denormalize what Ruth Malone has considered an anomaly that has a cause, very identified, which is the tobacco industry, which is what we have to neutralize through means. We have been commented how the increase of price and the generic packaging and the reduction of the availability of tobacco at the points of sale. We're not that bad in Spain compared to other countries, inclusive Europe, not only in the Canaries. You can't buy tobacco in a supermarket, but the tobacco industry worked it out so to open and expand the point of sales gas stations, convenience stores, in the last reform in the line of tobacco use. They really could not contain that immense industry. There's a lot to do. It's very important, and we will advance from science and from society, and these are clear today through this webinar. To concrete these ideas and the scientific evidence we have about control of tobacco use, to the voices of society that demand a regulation, and to advance to generations free of tobacco use, and the reduction of tobacco use, because smokers will stop smoking, and we will be able to get that we don't have any smokers in the future. I think we can't avoid the responsibility we have and the compromise. I would like to ask the politics. It's very important that they know that the people's health is in their hands. And to finish off, I would like to thank, and I almost forgot I was asked to do this, the name of organizations that organized this, especially Raquel and all the participants. Thank you very much. Gracias a todos, todos que han contribuido with their speeches, and 180 people that have been connected most of the part of the webinar and different continent with the same goal to end with tobacco use and be able to reach the end game. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.